It's not happening. Have another meeting after this.
Well, say.
It's implied.
Do they?
Another special town council meeting, work session, March 2024, and the date of March 19th, 2024. And thanks for everyone for being here. If you would, if you're able, please stand and join me for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, so on the agenda today, we have yard waste collection director John Mullis. Or do I need to turn over to you first, Mr. Perkins?
I just want to say, thank you, Mayor, just coming back as the follow-up to our work session earlier this year. John and Heather and Ken put a lot of work into recommendations based off feedback from you all and residents and things we've heard. So we're trying to figure out how to make this a more sustainable program and more waste than one. So but with that, does Marty's got anything to add? I'll turn it over to John and Heather.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to come back before you. As Manager Purvis stated, we had a pretty extensive December 14th workshop. That workshop presentation is online for those that might be tuning in and not familiar with that work session. A lot of the documents are not in this presentation, but will somewhat reference that. So today we're just going to follow up on the items that you asked about and that we wanted to come back before you and discuss. And so the purpose of today's meeting is to solicit input from you on potential ordinance revisions, establishing pre-collection set out parameters, excess yard waste collection fees, discuss cost recovery and your expectations, and discuss the direction of the future collection model. Go, Alan. I'll let you try that again. While we're pulling up the next slide, why a conversation on yard waste? We have, you have it in your packet. We'll see if this will come up anyway. Alignment to the strategic plan framework, environmental and safety compliance. You know, we discussed a lot of that during the December 14th and what that really means. That's a lot of the why. Now we want to add, thank you, Al. You're welcome. Now we want to add to that environmental safety compliance. I think you'll see later in the presentation the financial impacts that the program has. Just noteworthy for council, yard waste is not statutorily required, unlike a lot of the trash and recycling is mandated. A lot of the communities do this for disaster response, so they'll have the readiness there. And so that's why you see a lot of municipalities offering that. Not to mention when you get into leaf season, impacts of storm collection system. Service demand model and cost recovery subsidies that we currently have, and really trying to get a level of your understanding of what your service expectations are of us, as well as what the public's expectations are, the aesthetics of the community, and our operational challenges related to what current ordinances that we have, which are 50 plus years old, give or take a few revisions along the way. Material transfer, processing, and disposal challenges, and the interlocal agreement with Holly Springs is sunsetting. So a lot of those are the key topics and why we're having a conversation. This is a slide from the December 14th highlight. I'll not go over all that because I think you as a council already have seen this and you realize it. But what I did want to focus in on was just that we have no limits on weight or volume or household impacts. I think that directly impacts a lot of the cost recovery. Did want to give you an update on our yard waste transfer facility. We're evaluating a piece of property that that the town owns on Perry Road for use as a temporary facility. And we intend to seek a rezoning application for internal use of that property with a portion of it dedicated to the transfer for disaster debris receiving site, as well as processing of our yard waste generated by just the residents of Apex. And so we hope that around 4 acres will get us started on that. And depending on what direction council takes with future programming, whether that involves a convenience center, composting operations, or whatever, we can phase that in. So we've got that listed here is the update on that. This is a slide that was in your December 14th presentation that just mentions about our peer communities, how they currently do their yard waste program methodology and frequency. And as you may recall, regarding containerization of yard waste, just us and Zebulon still has the current loose yard waste model. This is recent. This is a situation we collected, even though you may see some of the logs there exceed our current parameters. This is a situation where a tree company came to a resident. Apparently she had an issue with a tree or dangerous or whatever. Put it out on the street. We ride by and see it, and started making inquiry. And the lady said hired a fly-by-night person that came through, had no way to contact him, or either if they did contact him, it was unresponsive. This is one of those situations that we wound up and collected at about $500 tipping fee. But the lady had nowhere else to go, basically what happened. If we would have some parameters on things, and maybe stuff like that wouldn't happen. One of the things I want to convey today is really, I think this is critical, is really trying to educate not only council, but our residents on what is a cubic yard of yard waste. The very simplest, it's 9 wheelbarrows. On the left is 3 cubic yards, and the F-150 is 3 cubic yards all the way to the top. You've seen the Waste Management has bags that they'll sell at Home Depot. That's 3 cubic yards, which is basically 2 by 4 by 8. And then the illustration on the right shows what the cubic yard looks like in the back of a pickup truck. So we thought that was very helpful in trying to help you visualize when you ride by and you see a pile on the street, what pile size is that? On the top, you see a dumpster, 8 foot by 10 foot long, 4 feet high, 10 cubic yards, and then what that looks like, 5 and 10, with people standing beside it. On the lower section, you'll see a 4 cubic yard dumpster, and in the middle there, that's 2 cubic yards, which is 3 by 6 by 3, and basically a pickup truck, long bed truck, right up to about the window, or he's just a little bit on the right, is 2 cubic yards. So it gives you reference. When you look at carts, a typical cart is a 1/2 cubic yard. So 4 carts would fit into the back of a pickup truck if you just want to get an idea on what the cubic capacity of a cart is, and what typically our yards generate on a regular basis. Typically we'll fit into that, but again, it depends on the harvest, how frequently they harvest, if they're mowing every week, if they have a storm, so a lot of those impacts. But just trying to educate on what the cubic yard volume is. This is unfortunately not uncommon. When you have pruning, and a lot of people will prune all at the same time, and you'll have some excess volume. It may be by homeowners, it may be by contractors, but if they do an entire home site, this is the types of volumes that you can see. And as you know, a lot of folks do this at the same time. One of the things we wanted to ask council about is to at least consider some of ordinance revisions that we think will probably be a a good thing and certainly help, collections. In red on this slide, we put curbside means within 3 feet of the curb. We didn't say out of the roadway. We'd like for it to be out of the roadway when possible, but it's not always possible. But if we could just have it where piles aren't placed out into the road, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, that would be great. The other thing under small limbs, we're asking for council to consider reducing down from 8 inches to 6 inches and 6 feet in length. This is because we manually lift these logs, and sometimes you get an 8-foot log that big around, and let's face it, when you're in the field, it's hard to see the difference in 8 and 10, 12, and we're trying to lift these items, and we want our employees to be safe. That's not uncommon either. A lot of the communities will be anywhere from 4 inches to 8 inches or so. So that's one consideration. And then the yard waste definition, we haven't asked that to change. That's pretty standard. This is the pre-collection practices as we currently have written. On this slide, we've just made some adjustments, asking to amend the ordinance where it's not commingled, and it should be out of the roadway when possible, so that verbiage kind of changes a little bit from the definition to our practices, because we realize that it may not be practical in all neighborhoods. If we can keep it out of parking spaces and within the boundary of the property, we do have folks that don't want to put yard waste in front of their property, and maybe there's a vacant parcel or something across the street. The reason you like your yard waste to be with the property is if you ever do have a fee-based collection, you can identify that property owner with that amount of yard waste. Item number C there, that hasn't changed. We just put a note in there that right now our permit is basically, stormwater permit is 48 hours. So we've just not recommended changing that. We just added the Y in there. And then on D, we have added a few more things. Mailboxes, parked vehicles, and other obstacles preventing safe collection. So we still want you to keep any yard waste 10 feet from the storm drain, but we'd also like to not have it right in front of the mailbox because of the obvious obstacles.
Why do you have 6 feet here than 3 feet for curbside?
3 feet away, 3 feet is away from the curbside, and 6 feet beyond, is that the question? The 6 foot beyond,
Shouldn't that be 3 if curbside means within 3 feet?
6 feet beyond means where a leaf hose can reach, beyond the curb 6 feet. Talking about in the first section A.
Yeah.
The leaf back hose only has so much reach. So if we're up on the curb, we can't reach more than 6 feet beyond the curb, and the 3 feet's within the curb.
Oh, I didn't know you actually collect stuff beyond the curb.
So the curbside is we want people to place it, if you're within the right of way, on the roadside, within 3 feet of the back of the curb.
Yeah.
Going into the road. If you have the space, you can place it on house side, residence side, out of the road within 6 feet of the back of curb.
Okay.
Yeah.
Better, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. My question has to do with enforcement of everything on that slide, the previous slide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the last time we didn't really have any enforcement mechanism. Going through your presentation, do you address that at all, or what can we do to actually get people to comply?
Yeah,
For
we-
example, 40 hours.
We do, and I've talked with Chris, he's here. Depending on your willingness to consider enforcement, for us, it's more education, having something in the rules. But what happens when you've got a repeat offender that says, so what are you gonna do? And Chris and I have had that conversation, so we're not prepared today to talk about that, but Chris is doing some research on what other communities are doing, but none of this really is helpful without some enforcement. I'd rather educate, try to get them into compliance, but you're exactly correct. We would need some type of enforcement that our current ordinance misses related to yard waste. That's something that we would have to explore.
you gotta lead into the problem with, like, we have no enforcement. Right? Like, you know, like the 8 inch, 8 feet, you know, now we're going to 6 inch, 6 feet, okay, fantastic, but.
Yep.
You know, if nobody's riding around town to check that stuff out, to write people up, then, you know, yes, we can educate all we want, but,
That's right.
you know, compliance is still voluntary.
That's right. And that's what we hope to get away from. We currently have some little yard waste tags. We picked up your yard waste. It was non-compliant because of this, you know, just to try to educate them. There are cases where something will be so out of our guidance that we have to tag it and say, if you can separate your pile, we can come back and collect it because we use different types of trucks. But you're exactly right. We do hope that if you're willing for us to consider ordinance changes, that when we present the ordinances back, we would have the enforcement on it in that ordinance.
I think in a little bit, you'll get into fees related to excess
Yep,
collection. So that's kind of one form of enforcement part, as we say, well, you put too much out. There, charge
Right.
extra.
that's right.
I guess I'll wait till it gets to there.
Okay, good deal. All right. This right here is where we really hope that we can get your feedback on and guidance. We have written this in red. That basically, we hope that you'll help us define what the parameters are. And, nothing more than 50 pounds. That's pretty standard. 6 inches, it's 8 now, you know. But at the end of the day, we need your help on what are you willing to, if you'll give guidance on what are you willing, what's an acceptable amount of yard waste? 2 cubic yards is a pickup truck. And that's, you know, that's where we have kind of landed internally. It's pretty easy to understand that we're willing to pick up to that amount. There are a lot of places in town that doesn't have a half a cubic yard or a quarter cubic yard, depends on how big that size they are. It also depends if they have a big clearing and pruning and you get all these massive amounts of yard waste. We have, you know, this is a big thing for us, and the current method that we use to collect, which is manually. And whether we go to a different model at some point in the future, this is still needed for defining what excess waste is and what pile limits is. And so this is where we know that you as a council will need some discussion around what do you think is acceptable. Is a pickup truck load per week collection? Think that's generous? Do you think that's, you know, not generous? I will say that these are just guides. Our goal, and our yard waste team knows, we're here to serve our residents. But what do we do when we get hit with the pile you saw a while ago? I mean, if we pull up on a pile and it's 4 by 4 by 8, are we going to collect it? Most likely. But what we probably would do if we saw that happen again or again and again, we would probably leave a tag and say, we collected your yard waste pile, but it appears to be exceeding what our size is.
How would you know, John? And so, you know, who's out there with, you know, the tape measure, you know, measuring the size of the file? Who's out there saying, this guy did the same thing 6 weeks ago, right? It's like, how would you even know that you have a repeat offender?
Yeah, they know. They absolutely know. It's pretty easy when you're in this business to judge a pile size. And we're always going to be generous. So if we tag someone and it's excess, it's going to be excess because we're already going to give them a little margin. But it's pretty easy. I mean, if you've got a pile of grass that's 2 foot diameter, next pile's 4 foot, you know what I mean? You're just going to get close. So it's really when those things are just over the edge consistently.
Would we not also, if we went to pick up a pile and it's too large, we pick it up, we could give them the rough dimensions of our pile. We would also note it in our city works, so we would have noted in our system that they will spend so that we wouldn't be guessing that it
You
was.
have a record.
Right, we would have a record in our city works that they had had that access, and we left them a note, and that's critical. We would never want to allow somebody the first time necessarily, right? We would have a note in our system that we left them a note, they were oversized, and then we would be able to follow back up on that at another day. That's right, that's right.
Now, just one quick question about like the sizing. Is there, I'd like to get your thoughts on seasonal fluctuations. Do we want to have a time period like, oh, spring, everybody during this, month tends to prune a lot of limbs and stuff. So the sizes get a little bit larger. Do we want to keep it a consistent amount year round just for each of them?
Yeah, you would have a lot of administrative burden and having fluctuating pile sizes and confusion. But I think that's where we face as an operational challenge that we face is when there are periods of heavier. And if people decide, that they're gonna put out the whole block, we don't get one neighborhood and we're full. We don't get, it all happens at the same time. And I guess that's where we need your help. Is that something that the town wants to provide? Like that unlimited type volume or no matter what? Is that something they should use a landscaper for when they have a big, huge clearing? Because we kind of get back to where we are now with what really. And so I think our goal is to help define what excess is, but still give them a free fee-based collection above that 2 cubic yards or whatever you determine. And you'll see here in the next slide. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
And while you're going there, just
Yeah.
the follow-up to that is, what about like post-storm?
Yeah.
So I just want to get your thoughts.
Post-storm, what is typical is the town manager, the council will authorize the town manager in a period of storm debris cleanup to waive all fees. That's pretty typical. This is our peer community. I know it's in your slide. As you'll see at the very top, collection parameters, weekly, loose collection. We have no limits, so none of the fees or additional collection matter. You drop down to carry, they are containerized and in bags, so they can have a lot of bags, but they're able to quickly gather them. But they don't offer any excess collection other than if you need a chipper at $350 for 30 minutes. As you go on down, Fuquay, their reservation system, Garner, they collect up to 6, but then they fine you if you have more out. And then Holly Springs, they're at 80 for up to 4 cubic yards. And then the other communities don't even offer excess. They're not gonna pick it up. They don't even offer.
When you've done this research, what I don't see is like if it works or not, like, or the feedback from the staff of the different places. Do you have that kind of in your head too, or written down somewhere? Like, if you go bi-weekly, are people unhappy, and are there like issues versus weekly? It's probably a big cost difference right there. And the other things on this list too, like what's the service level, and are people happy with that in those places?
Well, the service level is get all you can for free. I mean, that's kind of where we are.
That's where we are. So I'm saying, but
Yeah, the other
not-
communities, I don't know that I can speak to that honestly. I can speak with Holly Springs. They had anything above 2.5 cubic yards, and they've had it for years. Was $40 when I was there, and they've changed that to 80 because of cost and disposal. That's a big factor. I mean, the more you get, the more it costs, and how do you collect those fees? But I will tell you firsthand, the driver would go by, and when he had a pile that exceeded 2.5 cubic yards, he would leave a tag, and on the tag it had 40. He called level 1 40, level 2 80, up to $240. If they had more, they'd flip it over and write. They'd leave that on the door, and it would say, call this number and make your payment over the phone, and then we'll come back and collect it. I would say 80% of the time, they had called in their payment before the truck made it back to give the ticket to our public works admin. they did not mind paying it. Now, we'll talk about their latest change here in a little bit, but that has been consistent that they knew. And the public would tell you, we're just glad that you're coming to get it. You know, it was easy, you know. But as far as what residents like or don't like, I think it's just what the town offers, what level of service the town offers, you know.
They used to, okay.
Limitations on service. We put the top where we currently are, and it's a little hard to read on the screen. But what we've done is we're recommending in red. Right now it says the yard waste collection will be on a weekly basis year round. I've added according to the frequency and schedule adopted by council. The reason, and that's common in some other municipalities, the reason they do that is so if council wanted to go to a bi-weekly or a weekly or seasonal, that falls in council's jurisdiction on what they want to offer and when, you know. And then we've identified leaf season as December through February. That doesn't mean that the yard waste team might want to start in November because leaves start in November. The real reason that people do this is so you call loose leaf season as these 3 months. So you don't pick up leaves in March, April, May. You kind of, here's when leaf season ends. So make sure you've got all your leaves out by a certain time because you're using different collection vehicles. The other thing we've added on C is just some of the things that we see. Yard waste does not include the following prohibited items: dirt, root balls, dead plants and grasses contained in soil, concrete, rocks, construction debris. You would think you wouldn't have to identify this. The reality is you do. And we are beholden to where we take this stuff. And so if they don't take dirt, we can't take dirt to them. So we just can't collect anything. So we've expanded this based on what we typically see on the curb.
So I really like the idea of A and having kind of a variable frequency throughout the year.
Yeah.
It sort of bugs me when I see the yard waste trucks run around in the winter when there's
That's
nothing
right.
to collect. And you're just running these big trucks burning gas.
That's right.
For no reason whatsoever.
Yep.
Um,
This puts it in council's court to, for any reason, if they need to alter frequencies, if they chose to do certain neighborhoods certain ways, that would be easier for council to make that decision if they wanted to. Item D, a big one for us. Town will not collect debris cut and harvested by a landscaper or tree service contractor. Town employees will not collect yard waste generated from one property and dispose at another. That's another one of those potential billing things. You want to make sure that the yard waste is harvested there and is placed curbside in front of the parcel it's harvested.
on that, I was gonna say, on that point, do you have relationships with some of the bigger landscaping companies in the area to let them know, hey, you need to change the way you operate, or are all the big guys already doing it right, and it's more along the lines of the medium to little size?
We really don't know unless the yard waste crews, when they're out there, they know because they'll see the truck. So we do occasionally run across landscapers that we see, and it's because of frequency. You may collect it on Monday and it's back on Tuesday, it's back on Thursday, and you know what's going on. Nothing in our ordinance lets us stop that, you know? So, our yard waste crews know pretty much those addresses, of, you know, where those, things are going.
Question for
Yeah.
you. So I'm just thinking about, specifically, in the villages of Apex, like, there are some areas that have the mailbox kiosk, right, that only have one collection, but there are areas there that have mailboxes that are in front of every house, including areas where parking is all there. So it would be difficult to put yard waste in a specific area 100% of the time is directly in front of the house.
Right.
There may be a fire hydrant there where they have to move it off. It's not within 10 feet.
Right.
You know, so I think in some areas we might be setting people up for failure
Right.
to have the right answer of where to put stuff. So,
I think we could address that again when practical or when possible, potentially would be my recommendation, you know? But
sorry, like, again, how would you know, right? So if somebody, like, you, okay, there's a big pile in front of my house, I go, well, wasn't there yesterday, I didn't put it there, right? I mean, like, how would you assess where stuff was harvested?
I'll give you an example of my neighborhood. I live on like a little bubble cul-de-sacs that they don't allow anymore. So the only place for 3 houses to put their yard waste is literally on the side curb, which is the actual side yard of the house that's on the main road. We're on this bubble. And so the reality of that is there is nowhere else to put it because you'd be putting it on top of your water meter and you clean out. You don't want to, you gotta use some common sense in the sense, because if you'll put people on the backside of the curb, one of the problems putting it on the backside of the curb, if people on a small lot, they put it on their clean out, we go to clean it up or grab it and break the clean out. Things like that can happen, right? Or if we don't put it on top of the sidewalk, because people can't use the sidewalk. So you got all these different parameters that you have to deal with when you're dealing with loose yard waste. And so in the case here, I would think in my neighborhood, what the case would be, everybody's still gonna be putting it on that side lot. On that side of that house. And, you know, maybe the question comes up, they ask the question, they explain it's 3 homes. And then if somebody does do a large cutting, you know, that owner's just gonna have to own up. You know, hopefully all good neighbors getting along, but they would own up that that's their extremely large cutting and not mine versus theirs. So it's gonna be, there is no perfect way. To your point, there's just some places you just can't meet it because that place is in front of a fire hydrant. Well, we don't want to put it there for sure. So,
Right, I mean, literally the only place that we could put yard waste would be in front of our neighbor's house. To
Right.
meet every single one of the requirements that we're talking about, 10 feet away, all that type of stuff. So, you know,
And I think that gets into, that's if it's loose and it's big. If that's the case. Wanted to run you through a scenario regarding cost. We've taken a look at, we've taken just one example of a grapple truck. $495 is its operational cost, ownership, maintenance. And down here, right below is it can do 14 stops a day. And assuming, 500 pounds per stop, well, this is just a bit about its capacity. As far as disposal, what we pay for disposal, right now, we're at $25 a ton. However, there are some disposal places that only charge by the truckload and you don't scale. In those cases, they just charge for $175, no matter how much it weighs. When we go in those places, we really pack it down. So we've used the example here is if you've had, the knuckle boom goes out and runs a route and he has 14 stops, picks up 500 pounds a stop, 3.5 tons. That's what the disposal cost is, which is $87 for disposing all of that. And the truck's $495. So 14 households is $582. The full cost of that collection for that 500 pound assumption, $41.57. So if you had every household that paid one excess collection fee, you're talking, near $1 million. You would not have that, in Apex because a lot of small lots. But what I was trying to share with you is to give you a good understanding of what it costs. So while we want to get all that we can get every time, there's a real cost. This is a real example of what it costs to run that truck. Now, disposal cost is even more when we're using a chipper because it's a 2-man operation. You have a chipper, a truck, a driver, and the helper that's loading the material. So it gets even more, but I thought that it would be very important for us to share with you what it really truly costs to collect that at one stop. And I will add, this is optimal. What's the chances of going out and collecting, all 14 stops, perfect real world scenario? Your true costs are probably even higher, but we think that's a good number. And because of that, we want to go over, again, when we need your help on if you're willing to establish what set out parameters are. And if you're willing to define what excess capacity is and define that, and you want to charge a fee, now that you know what the cost is, what would you be willing to set a rate for? And so we are proposing that residents schedule a collection if they've got yard waste exceeding whatever you decide. We'll just say 2 cubic yards. But if they're scheduling collection, we can go larger on the limbs because we're going to collect it automated. So they could go up to a bigger size, 12-inch diameter is when they're scheduling excess. And so what we're recommending is collect up to 2 cubic yards per household or anything above 2 cubic, anything bigger than a pickup truck, 2 cubic yards, and go up to 10 cubic yards. That way we can plan our routes, plan it in advance, less carbon footprint, more scheduling. And so here are some of the things that you may want to consider is, you know, and you'll see a little bit on the next slide, you'll see a little bit about some of our subsidies that we have in the current program and how you may want to trim those subsidies or try to get more cost recovery. You may want to set a minimum rate. You may choose to not set a rate at all, just let the subsidy cover it. But we're recommending $50 for each cubic yard with 10 cubic yards per collection stop. And then the no fee options are in the future. You may want to consider a convenience center. Of course, loose leaves are collected year round or collected during peak leaf season with no volume parameters. You know, leaves are leaves. So again, as I mentioned in the first work session, we're not recommending a change at all. That works and it's quick. It's a lot of volume, but you know, the way we do it really keeps the storm drains out of the storm drain pretty minimal. So we want to stay with that. And then you may want to consider a menu of offerings. You know, Councilmember Gray, you mentioned that you set certain things, so that's a council decision. We would just mention the administrative burden of whatever we do because that's a real impact. And then what we saw in Holly Springs is whenever someone would get a yard waste tag for additional fee, about a third of those didn't need the service anymore. Something happened to it. Some of those people would throttle it, put it in their backyard and bring it back out the next week. You know, that happened all the time because people were wise and said, well, they'll get up to this. And I've met with countless people that called to complain that they had, you know, a lot of prunings and they go, well, can I just set this out over the next couple of weeks? I said, sure. You know? And it's about, you know, scheduling the trucks and the capacity of our trucks as well.
Is it not possible to, you need the customer to affirmatively request the service? Because I think as an end user, I'd rather just take it.
You can. There are some communities that they take a picture and they send it in your utility bill. That's easy. I mean, that could be done too. Our grapple truck, we have a new grapple truck that has a camera on it. And when they're pulling up to a pile, there's a curbside camera. Just hits the button and takes a picture. And that's stored in the cloud. So there's several options to doing that if you wanted to. If you put it, the language that's written in a lot of ordinances is if you put yard waste out, it belongs to the town. If it's excess above this, we send you a bill for the excess. That's very possible.
So for the excess pickup, how does it work? So you don't pick it up, you leave the tag, they can haul. Do you come back as a one-off and send the truck out, or do you collect it?
Well, that's all yet to be determined based on, you know, what council's direction is. There's two systems I've seen. If it's out on the curb, they collect it and send the resident an invoice in their utility bill. Or they tag it, you have excess yard waste, and you'll schedule them. And then if that route day, maybe it's 3 days or 4 days, but remember we have a 48-hour. So what we're hoping is if you're gonna have excess, you'll let us know. But if we see it, it would be better to go ahead and grab it and invoice them. But that's up for council to decide how you want to do that.
You're gonna be pushed back from people who are like, well, is that a drawback? If we automatically invoice people, so people might say, well, I was shit.
They argue with the size, that's why you take a picture. They argue with it, there's no way it was that big a pile, you know, that's the thing. So you like to have an idea going into it that we estimate your charge will be $50, $100, $150.
Biggest issue with doing the automatic is Kingsworth case in my neighborhood, and a case plenty around, that there's multiple families using the same spot. So you're not who you're gonna charge, so that's gonna create a problem.
And that's a big no-no, and it really is yard waste having a community pile. Ran into that with one place where their houses were on hills and all the neighbors used, this is another community, not here, another jurisdiction. And I know that the town attorney said you can't be doing that, but it's gotta be by your yard.
But there are places in this town that you cannot make it. So I mean, that's what we're saying. There's places that can't be met. Because of the style street layout we have. And some of the townhome communities, because water resources is not here to be represented, but they don't, you can't be on top of the cleanouts. Water meters, because we're going to AMI. You start putting it on top of the AMI system or the meter readers, then you're not going to get your meter reads. So there's a lot of things that's got to be considered. I mean, obviously, this is, in my opinion, a step to going, right now we have no volume limit. So this is the first step in getting a volume limit. And then education. Generally, once people are educated, I don't think you'll have as many excess oversized piles when people are educated. Some people are not going to follow the rules, but generally they will. But that leads us to where we may go in the future with containerized systems, which is even a smaller pile. In a smaller system, which eliminates the concerns of where it's going, because then you don't have loose material. But that's further down the road. And that's where council will ultimately go.
And again, I think for us, it's council giving us direction on what they think is a adequate amount of what to collect each week, so we can program that out. And then what do we do when we get these massive amount of piles, and how to deal with that? You had asked at the last workshop to try to go over our program cost and recovery and subsidies, and we've done that. And I know it's hard to see on this screen here, but what we've taken is our current program at full budget, and then we've estimated a growth of 95 units a month, and that is actually where we are right now. We reached out to the inspection department. It's how many COs we're getting on a monthly basis. And so we did include debt, and I will say that currently we pay for assets when we have them. But if you're trying to balance this model against a future model, you need to have apples and apples. So we've included debt for this analysis on the capital side. Right now, with February 2024, your household count is 23,854, and your yard waste rate is 783. So right now, the town is subsidizing 30%. Your rate would need to be 1121 to be able to have a sustainable program that had no subsidies. As you grow, because this is front loaded, as you're adding residents, we'll just jump to the very bottom here. On the very bottom here, you'll see $10.58 in blue, and beside it $2.75. As you're adding, again, your budget is front loaded, so as you're adding residents, when you get to the end, that rate is lower, not substantially lower, but still lower. So what we wanted to show you is that if you just tried to cut your subsidy in half of $2.75, and you added a rate of $1.38 and your yard waste fee was $9.21, then you're cutting your subsidy in half. That's just for illustrative purposes only. Maybe you may not have a goal of it being, the yard waste rate covering the full cost. That's a council decision. Now, if in blue, I know Councilmember Matthew asked about, could we potentially lower the base rate? Potentially is if you had excess fees. So the people that are using more of the system is paying for more of the disposal, more of the trucks, then you could potentially do that. And right now, you've got almost $1 million of subsidies annually. And, how do we take that subsidy down? I mean, that's general fund money that could be used for the police officer, and you name it, something in parks. Not that this isn't just as important, but just wanted to show you where you would be financially on your rates.
Yeah, and I think like this is the most important slide.
Yeah.
For me,
Yep,
because that's bad.
yep,
Like we're only recovering 70% of our costs for our yard waste program. And our yard waste program, of the expenses we have, it's heavily tilted towards the larger lots, the bigger homes. And what we have is, even though the cost went into it, I mean, how many thousands of townhomes are manufactured right now that don't use this yard service ever? And they still pay, $783 a month. Right. So I think that's really unfair. I think it's really important we fix this and that we do have our costs set up so the larger users of yard waste are paying these access tipping, or not tipping fees, but access collection fees
Right.
to help rebalance this a little bit. 'Cause this is the problem, is that someone in Village of Apex is paying the same as someone with a massive lot who's dumping a huge pile.
What are you putting me for?
Yeah.
yeah. And
That's
we'll,
what your neighborhood is.
if you want to go ahead, this was not in your slide deck because this was just, under your packet, you've got a spreadsheet. I think, and we just did this morning, trying to show you, I knew, can't remember which council member, but asked about what are the impacts of it. It may have been you, but I can't remember, wanted to know what the impacts are. So this spreadsheet on the back side, I have listed out, this is just one knuckle boom. Keep in mind, this doesn't count chippers, but the reason I chose the knuckle boom, we have work orders on every knuckle boom. Now, if the knuckle boom goes in the neighborhood first and sees a pile, there won't be a work order. He's gonna grab it and go, realizing it's so commingled that the guys can't grab it by hand. He's gonna go ahead and grab it. When the chipper runs a route first and sees a pile, they do the work order in City Works, which prompts our dispatch of our knuckle boom. So this is wonderful information. It's accurate. It's the data you're going to want to know what neighborhoods are using the grapple truck the most. And so I'm just going to go over, we'll just take the first one. For example, in Walden Creek, we had 130 work orders for that neighborhood. But specific users, there were 99 of those 130 were unique, which means some of those people requested a knuckle boom 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. I didn't send you that printout because it's specific addresses, but we know who the users of the system are, and we also could target them for education. Your percent of the total is all the way down at the bottom, 1,677 work orders. But what I wanted to show you is that we're estimating these subdivisions, this is pretty accurate, but in Walden Creek, they had 130 occurrences for 208 houses. So 62% of the entire community used the knuckle boom or had that kind of volume of yard waste. This is very helpful because as you get down and you flip on the other page, you're going to see 40% of all the knuckle boom services were just one-offs. So you want to know what communities you're impacting with a change. This is a really good guidebook. So when you flip over, you can see at the very top, I just kind of rolled up all these subdivisions to where you can see the total number of occurrences, the number of households. Now, I think from an elected official, this is an important number of households in these subdivisions is 15,000, and you have 24,000 households. So in just these neighborhoods alone, you are impacting a lot of your communities. But then when you look at how it breaks down, it'll give you, as an elected official, where's the most likely impact? That's not to say that we don't have large piles all over town. We do. But when the grapple truck is used, it's normally a big pile, a heavy pile, something that we can't even grab or chip. So I wanted to, and I apologize for sitting in your slide deck. Again, you'll see we just completed this GIS this morning. But I knew it was important for you to know, honestly, where these volumes are occurring. These are the communities that, if they were going to be vocal about excess collections, these are the ones. The capital improvement plan, you asked about the possibility of changing models. So what I want to do is show you, this is straight out of the current budget book. And I've highlighted a little asterisk in red. For example, leaf truck replacement or leaf truck addition, $280,000. This was already programmed before price increases. The last leaf vac we bought was $313. So you have already programmed in. Now, you know the CIP can change annually, but this is what is posted now. You have $1.3 million somewhat earmarked just to be adding a leaf vac every year, because that leaf vac is 12 months a year, year round. So I wanted you to know where we were programmatically with what we're anticipating that to be. And this is another slide that's very impactful and important for you to try to understand. So we wanted to show you the current state of where we are with just equipment. So on the top left, you'll see at the current rate, leaf vac 318, chipper truck 270, and the combo chipper truck 201, how many we use, which is 13 pieces. And there in orange, you'll see 3.4 million. If you scoot on down to future state, I wanted to show you what a future state would look like if you were to go carts. We're going to skip over for right now where the carts are at 1.7. We're going to go down to where the green is, that section. If you take, you would need 7 new rear loaders. You would need 7 side loaders, that's called ASL, and you would need 1 rear loader. That capital cost is 4.3. So around a little, right at $1 million difference in equipment. And you would still keep your leaf vacs that you have in service, and you would transition them if you went to a different model. Over to the right is just more statistics about a rear loader and a side loader, how they collect. I'm happy to go over any of that with you, but this is how you justify how many pieces of equipment you need to go through. The next page, let me go ahead and go to that. We may have to come back. But the next page, yeah, I can.
So there's no leaf vacs in the bottom half of this chart. So it's the assumption here that all the leaves are gonna get stuffed into containers because.
No, you would still keep your loose leaf season. You're just running these 3 months a year. So what you would have is where you've got the replacement cost. That truck now that's scheduled for replacement is operating 12 months a year. These trucks would start moving in a new model to just leaves only 3 months a year. So you don't have to buy any leaf vacs, probably programmatically for 2 or 3 years down the road. And then when you do, what you would hope to do is buy a truck that can be used year round, and you buy like a hook rib, like military or roll off or something. So you use the truck year round, but then just the leaf collector is a separate body that's used 3 months a year for loose leaf. So you basically park those and you switch over to the rear loader. Now the rear loader would still go 12 months a year.
You still have leaf vacs in this scenario. So why are they not on the capital fund? Like, what are you not showing?
they're
Yeah.
lasting longer, right?
You're not buying leaf vac. This is just what if you had the same capital deployed to do everything year round. So the leaf vac's already paid for. They're sitting there to
So
use.
this is telling us that you need 4.3 million in incremental capital expense to get to a container model. I'm just not sure what this is telling me anymore.
Okay. So at the very top, that's your assets that we currently use to
That we
collect.
currently have in our fleet. That's
If you
capital
switch
value.
over, you switch over to the other model, you've got 4.3. So you're basically changing trash trucks.
Because you're leaving the leaf vacs out, I think you're saying you're still gonna keep in service.
You'll keep them in service, but you won't have to capitalize, you won't have to probably replace one for another 3 years. So you would add that down into the future. But
Why are the grapple trucks there then? Because like you would keep the same grapple trucks, or do you need 3 incremental?
those are already bought. The 3 that you have there, I'm just showing you what the asset valuation is on just new asset cost.
So today, the leaf trucks run, and they have brass and
12 months a year.
12 months a year. The new model, we get par for 9 months a year.
I get that. I don't understand why leaf trucks are not in the bottom chart, but grapple trucks and chippers are. Because wouldn't the same,
Oh, okay. The grapple and the trucks is part of your current model moving forward, and you already have those. So I was just trying to show current asset cost to new model asset
telling me
cost.
that the leaf vacs are gonna be there too, so like, shouldn't they be part in the bottom there somewhere, unless the value may be lower, may need fewer of them. But
I mean, I guess we could look at this many different ways. I just chose to show asset cost to illustrate. I wasn't trying to do a full-blown capital plan of that.
no, and it's, this trying to make sense of this, right? Because we have 2 grapple trucks, you're showing 3 in the bottom half, so that means that we're gonna either acquire 3 or we're gonna add 1, like.
You want
So,
startup costs in comparison.
right.
Yeah, but so that means then that, so we're saying that this is startup costs, right? Then we're saying we're going to go buy 3 incremental grapple trucks. And then just trying to understand if I interpret this slide correctly.
So the 4.3 million is the side loader trucks, 3 grapple trucks, 2 chipper truck combos, and the 340,000. So that we're taking the assets that we're using. We just left out the leaf vacs because with only 3 months a year, you're not gonna have to even worry about them for a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years before you'd even have to buy another leaf vac. So we've added the capital cost of what assets are being deployed in the field. We can revisit that, but again, I'm just trying to show what the asset costs are to go from basically instead of a leaf vac, a trash truck. At the end of the day, that's the difference, is the increased cost of a trash truck above a leaf vac. And just looking at the cost. But we can program in leaf vacs.
Because we have grapple trucks. I don't understand why you're showing 3 more. It's like 1 incremental I could see because you go from 2 to 3. But I don't understand the 3 more grapple trucks.
That's not 3 more. We're adding 1. At the top, you've got 2. In the new model, you would add 1 for excess collection, most likely.
For the sake of the time, but I know we still
Let's move on.
got.
Right.
Well, but before you go on, sorry, I had a question on this. Do you have like a 10-year like number? Because in theory, if we're making a switch, there'd be an upfront cost, but then after a certain amount of time, we've switched, and then there's, in theory, different kinds of costs for maintenance and for equipment.
Very, very similar, believe it or not. We checked with Raleigh on their ASL trash trucks. The leaf vacs are extremely expensive to maintain. So a lot of the assumptions we've made is there's not a lot of change in
In the capital.
in operations too.
Of operations, you require fewer guys, right? Because it's
No,
more
we've still got the same amount of piece of equipment. The only thing that really changes is your chipper truck combo that you've got 5 out there, so you've got 10 employees. Here, if you're stepping down, you've got 2 trucks, you've got 4 employees, but you also are having a potential transfer yard coming on scene. You sort of mean, so we didn't address whether there's increased labor or reduced labor. We just took what the capital side of this.
Yeah.
We didn't try to program out personnel, which would actually be less personnel.
Figure it would, yeah.
It'd be less personnel, because the whole idea is you're trying to get automation.
I would say what we've got right now is just a very preliminary look at what it could look like in the future. And if it's something that council wants us to dig into to see the true program costs, I agree, we need to look long-term, not just the capital cost to get into the game, but then the cost of operations and maintenance over a period of time. We can, if that's a next step, this is really just trying to see today is, do we want to reduce the volume that we're picking up and codify that to where we're going to educate the public that we're going to do smaller files, which is the first step. Because if you go to containerization, you're talking, we said, if you told us to do it today, we're still 2 years out at best before we can even start the program, because you can't get the equipment. It's 19 to 20 months out on the trucks. So, you know, there's convenience yard that would have to be considered, because you can't really go to containerization without a convenience yard, because you need somewhere to take that excess. That's one of the, you know, we reached out to Holly Springs to kind of see how their program was going. They're 3 weeks in. They're really pleased so far. They, you know, basically the set out rate has increased from less than 50% to over 60% in 3 weeks. And then this past weekend, they had their largest drop off ever at their convenience center, volume wise, that they've had since that convenience center has been in operation, which ties back into their containerization, you know, because that container is only, you know, half cubic yard or less. So that's a whole lot less than the 2 that we would be talking about here today. We're just taking that initial step to put some restrictions on, because right now there's no restriction.
This slide here is a future state. Now, this in blue does include the cost of waste bins. And you may go back to the last slide. It may be hard to see, but basically a cart is $62. And if you divide that into 72 months, that's 86 cents a household. But this number here, 4.8, does include the cost of the carts and the new equipment. And it shows you on the right what our current state is. And you get to the very bottom, you're looking at our current state for the equipment is $2.14. And if you go to look at the capital cost for the future state, that's 72 cents more. Basically, the difference is the carts. I mean, the cost of the carts and the equipment is not that much when you look over time. So in this illustration here, we think that the change into the model is not prohibitive from an equipment standpoint. Your costs are very similar in a leaf bag versus a trash truck. The only difference is you're adding a cart. And that's really just to simplify, that's what that matters. Now, in the illustration, we used 6 years. Trash trucks, yeah, we have a replacement cycle. Pretty much we try to get 6, if we can extend a leaf back to 7 years or 8 years, but you just get progressively more maintenance on those when they hit a certain age. So for the illustration, we've used 6 years. A yard waste cart it depends on the manufacturer, but on average, they have a 10-year warranty. We factor them in at 6, because you do want to have a certain amount of rotation in your carts. But this is really just for illustrative purposes. And as Marty mentioned, the lead time on equipment, if you would even want to consider that, is 19 months. And so what we want to talk to you about is, if you're willing to help us establish pre-collection set out parameters and what those are, help us define and establish, what that size is, as well as if you're willing to charge an excess fee effective a certain date, and then for us to understand the level of cost recovery, that you're willing, or would like to target. I mean, some communities who have gone to this have said, we want to, I know Cary, the last I checked, they were at 91%, but they had a goal of increasing that to get to 100%. That was several years ago. They may be at 100% now. I don't know. But that's a council decision. It would just be nice to know, because that would help us in our programming, figure out, where we want to be rate wise. If we know, we think the program's going to cost X, this is what the rate would need to be. And then the direction on containerization is, if you wanted to go to a yard waste collection model, that's at a minimum March of 2026. If you were to try to ramp that up, you would like to start a program that's just like Holly Springs. They launched theirs coming right out of leaf season. So they went live March. That's a good idea if you want to do it. You wouldn't want to start at the beginning of leaf season. That would be a bad time. So anytime, March is ideal, but you could also start in July. There's no real thing there other than just trying to decide what your willingness is to go to that containerized model.
Based on the staff recommendations of 2 cubic yards per pickup and the $60 per 2 cubic yards for excess.
Yeah.
If you modeled out what the incremental revenues of that would be, so kind of looking into Councilmember Mahaffey's earlier comments, right? Like, I think this model, the cost needs to be, instead of peanut butter spread across all residents, needs to be more usage based. And so I would love to see a model where we lower the base rates and then have the excess collection fees, for those larger users, right? And so what does that do based on your existing recommendation? First of all, it's a profit recovery, right? Will that help us close that $1 million gap that we're looking at right now? And if we have access, can we lower the base rate and still come to a reasonable cost recovery percentage?
Yeah, and that, we could just, I guess I could calculate it, but like, for example, if we took this 1,677 and took it times $50, I think that's probably 85,000 or something dollars. I mean, just in revenue. The problem is we have so much volume, the chippers we're just collecting. So we don't know how many piles we would have. We know in the case of a grapple truck, we have, 1,677 piles times, say, if every one of them just had 1 cubic yard, that's 85,000. But the reality is, what if they had 2? That's 170,000. It would be hard for us to estimate until we started having excess piles that we could come back and give you a better example. So, for example, if we started July 1 at $50, we would have history of how many excess collection piles that would help us make that. It would be really hard for us to take a stab in the dark, just because we have the wild west when it comes to piles. So I don't know how much volume that excess fee would generate right now.
Well, we have at this current date, we've got like some idea on tonnage that we've dropped off in the year, but we have no idea on the volume we've dropped off. So we don't have necessarily the makeup of whether is that correct?
That's great. We just wouldn't have a really good way to do an estimate on what this excess fee would be. That's why we recommended just above cost. If you had to pay the disposal in the grapple truck example, if you had to pay the $175 a truck, I think that runs it up like $45 or $46. So we picked 50, knowing that's not the bottom. That's about the very bottom of your cost. You probably could have situations that's higher cost than that, but
50 is only 2 cubic yards, right? So there will be piles that are bigger. So that's, just doing the simple method you just did, right? let it be $100,000 and then excess, collection fees. That's still a far cry from the $1 million that we need to cover expense or cover existing costs, right? And so, I mean, it helps, don't get me wrong, right? That's, is it even worth it at that point with all the administrative overhead that we're introducing? Like, what's your administrative cost going to be to recover $100,000, in extra, collections, right? So what's, is there a calculus there? Like, do we have the systems? Do we have the people to do all this today? Or do you need to hire an additional staff or, just to keep track of it all, right? In which case the benefit is nil.
Right.
I'm not sure you can answer that, but I was thinking about making it more equitable. And I think the answer to that would be, you may go lower than 2, you go like for 1 cubic yard is the baseline, and you kind of ramp up the excess a little bit faster.
The problem with that is that you're gonna have yards that'll be over 1 every single week.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
all every single week, and then it's like, well.
Unless it's automatic with the camera thing.
And then what you've established essentially is tiers. Where it's like you have certain yards that are always on, and that's again comes to the administrative overhead of an ability to even support to do that. You look at for a wastewater, like maybe, or not wastewater, like, runoff, like, you have stormwater tiers.
Yeah.
You can imagine yard release to a repair townhome, you're paying $2 for nothing, but if you're in a larger yard, you're paying.
So I like our tier system in that way for stormwater.
Well, I mean, I'm just doing the math in my head, and it seems to me like if this was an actual equitable system, people with the large yards putting out the yardways, they'd be paying like thousands of dollars a year. And then some people would be paying nothing. But that would be the actual equitable way of paying per pound or whatever. Like,
Yes.
it would be thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
For someone in some of these green neighborhoods here.
That's right, it would be.
So could we consider something like, because going from 2 cubic yards to a maximum of 10 cubic yards, that's a huge difference, right?
That was just, it could be unlimited, but it's just that what we're trying to do is maybe if we have excess, if the truck holds 20, maybe we could go to 2 or 3 houses before we go drop off. We still pay the disposal no matter what. So you'd be paying, it's $50 for each 2.5 cubic yard. So they would be.
Part of it is changing behavior too. It's not all about getting revenue. It's about, well, if we charge fees, maybe people will stop generating so much yard waste. Maybe we'll, the ordinance changed to get the landscapers to do it, like generate less waste for us to handle road certificate fees. So it's not all about revenue. It is about revenue. It's all about changing the behavior of our customers too. I mean, just getting stuff off the curb and onto the guard sounds like it'd be a big win for a lot of reasons too.
I feel like we'll get a much better data set if we adopt the recommendations so that we can figure out how to better democratize this. Because I feel like that cost ultimately will really become democratized once we get containerization.
Right.
And you're talking containerization, best case scenario, 2026.
Yeah, 2 years.
What's the optimal? Because I look at us reducing the size and increasing the cost of taking away after lights, let's get containerization.
Yeah.
It's a long education process, but 2026 being the earliest, but what's optimal? Because you gotta get additional equipment, trucks, stuff like that. So what are we looking like in terms of the best adoption time for containerization? Because see, that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I think actually March 2026 is optimal. And the reason I say that is if you're willing to give us the parameters, it's education. But then whenever we leave a tag, we're going to start putting it in city work. We're going to have this data is because we have work orders. We're going to know the specific addresses, how much tonnage that they're generating. And I think within a 6-month period of time after adopting, we're going to have some good data. But when we have a full year of data, I think by that time, if we could open up a convenience center, and I know Marty and I both talked to their assistant manager today, the convenience center, if you have a transfer yard, you just carve a front part for the residents to bring stuff. You have an attendant there that's pushing up the pile anyway. So you have a person that can engage with the resident. To me, that's paramount, because if we have excess collection fees and we open up a convenience center, by the time you get to the cars, you're exactly right. They're starting to throttle their needs down. And let's face it, if they have a big pruning and they hire a landscaping contractor, they're supposed to take that with them. But if they don't, we're there for them. We can still give them, the service and the way to get rid of it at a reasonable price.
I'm gonna suggest that, if we, do go to bins, and I think you're right, I think that's the way we have to go here, and that's gonna only be a half a cubic yard, you said, at most. Then we need to pare it down from 2 down to like 1 to
Yeah.
prepare people for that. So, and if people continually go over, then they pay the excess fee. That's just the way to handle that. But I think if we, at this point, if we go from 2 and then next year down to 1 and then down to half, people are gonna be upset.
So
They keep changing the guardrails.
Do we want to consider the convenience center prior to going all the way to 1? Would be my only question. But that would be something y'all have to tell us. So I know.
I will say that I had a conversation with several people at Holly Springs today, and it was in reference to Councilmember Mahaffey to ask what was the lessons learned. And one of the things, and I can't believe you said that because I did not even think of this. So they've always had 2.5 cubic yards, 5 cubic yard, you paid in increments. And so they said the biggest lesson learned was that their yard waste crews had been so lenient that the people thought that this was the volume. Because we want to do right by the residents, we want to get everything we can get. But I think you're right, and I appreciate what Marty said too. Finding the glide slope to get to the right place, to get them ready, is very important. We want to take care of our residents, but we have a serious problem, cost recovery wise and volume wise.
I think this is the question. Is having it pared down to maybe 1. And you're right, maybe we need a convenience center before we put that in place. But, or an option for people to go to, so that when we do send out the education, it's like, okay, if you know you have more than this one, take it to this place.
Yeah.
That way they have a avenue to manage it themselves. But yeah, I'm thinking I'd like to start at 1. And then with the eventual option of going to the bins, calling for scheduling more that it's in the bins. I think our fees need to be higher than 50. And then the other thing I was thinking about too, thinking more about the situation with like cul-de-sacs, like Marty was talking about, and the situation within the villages of Apex. I really do think we're setting people up for failure. And I think the 10 feet on, let's see, it was page 712-128. Yeah, I think the 10 feet is fine, keeping it away from storm drain basins, but when you add in mailboxes, parked vehicles, other objects and things like that, you're gonna have a lot of people that have violations. So I think we need to get that down from maybe 10 feet to like 6 feet, something like that. That I think that's more doable for people, especially in these tight situations. So.
Are we fine with that, Marty, on stormwater, you think? 6 to 10 or?
I think the 10 feet is in my permit on our, but
Yeah,
she's talking about the other.
Okay.
I think we need to separate that out then. Maybe 10 feet from the storm drain catch basins and the other stuff, maybe 3 feet, 6 feet, whatever way we want to decide there. But I think 2 feet, 10 feet is too much.
That's fine.
So.
We will work with what parameters council gives us.
So
We just try to avoid getting the car, anything we can keep away, but no, we're happy to operate within those parameters, whatever council decides.
What's the safe amount from a mailbox? You're not gonna hit it with the truck. With the
Yeah,
arm.
I think 6 would work. I've seen them thread the needle, but what happens with hydraulics? Hydraulics can get wonky and you think you're going here, the next thing you know, and that's really why we put that separation in. But we'll be careful.
Yeah,
Coming back to the tiered system idea where people with 1 yard waste just pay more, because what worries me about the 1 cubic yard is that I think there's a lot of yards that just generate from a single mow, a little over a cubic yard. And that's fine, they should pay more, fine with that, just like them having to call.
Which is the door, environmental friendly thing to do.
They'll come up with, I think that.
To my point, a tiered system, like, it seems like that's really not viable in this case, because the guy in the truck can't like look up what tier you're in and then decide whether to leave a tag or not. It's just flat right or not the night.
So, kind of going back to the, so I agree that, like containerization, that's kind of our end state, right? What I'd like to know is what is our startup cost in terms of, the equipment purchases and all that? Is that 4.8 million? So.
It is.
And does that include the convenience center or is that yet another?
No, so that's another discussion that we'll have to have at some point is what is, we're in the process of trying to get rezoning, but we've not designed anything. The good news is pretty much you can use dirt, but it's a real, if you're gonna have the public there, you probably need some concrete aprons. It's not uncommon to see roll-off containers with the rear door open and you just put your stuff in on. But that's kind of what you do in an emergency situation. You can make it a little nicer. But for practical purposes, if we can just get it on the ground, we can process it from that point.
And so, I mean, we have lands, right? But if that's part of our end state that we need to have a convenience center for anything in excess of what fits in the container, then we need to consider that cost as part of the equation.
We do.
I also would like to see a projection of, okay, if we do all that, then to Councilmember Gann's point, what is our depreciation operating cost going to look like over some period of time, right? Because if we are replacing the leaf bags less frequently, right, there's a benefit to that. But now there's other equipment that needs to be purchased, that will offset that. And I want to understand kind of what the bubble is, right? And where we're going to see that bubble and then kind of the tail of what the new expense pattern will look like compared to what we're looking at today.
Yeah, I was hoping there'd be more operational savings from going to containerization. That sounds like it's basically a wash.
I think so. And I think just the volumes and the disposal costs and all the nuances that just continue to go around this whole program, how you collect it.
Is there cost avoidance, right, to that point, right? So if we have two people, trailing a chipper today, will we still have that, right? Or will we have less of that? And so with the existing staff, we can accommodate a larger body of residents. So we don't have to hire new people for some period of time, right? Because there will be some benefit there, presumably, that, maybe that's on day one, but at some point. So I'd like to kind of see that cost benefit analysis on the two models.
Okay.
Seems to be a lot of information gathering necessary as we move forward. What is the next steps like from today? I know we get a lot of feedback.
Can I suggest we can go from the bottom to the top here on these decisions? And so if we're interested in the container thing, that's kind of the first, it may trickle down to the other decisions because we don't need to nitpick on the ones 1 and 2. If it's only gonna be for a couple of years and then we're gonna go container, it's gonna be different anyway. So like, I would argue that like the choice of the 1 and 2 is predicated on if we're going to go for we're intending to go for the container model. It would be that decision now and then.
What do y'all think about that?
I think it's a good point in that if that's the ultimate goal, we could build in, even whether it's immediately go to that or it's a phase plan to go to that. I think that is the place to start. Because if you don't want to do containers, then it's a whole other model. But if you want to do containers, then you do this. So we think that would be.
Yeah, I got to.
And I gotta be out in 7 minutes.
I would like to see us kind of model that container plan. I think that gives us a chance to deal with the equities and because it's a glide path that kind of curves some of the acres along the way. That would be my.
Well, what I don't want to do is set limits and not give our residents an alternative, right? So if we're saying 2 yards or 1 yard, whatever we choose, and there's no other way to dispose of your yard waste, because we don't have a convenience center built, you know, we're putting people in, you know, the tight spot, right? Like, what am I gonna do? Like, if people are gonna get creative and find places to dump their stuff, you know, not in the places where we're gonna see it. So I think this notion of glide path, right? Like, what are kind of the steps towards containerization? What is kind of the, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3? Is going to be really important to understand as we start introducing, you know, some of these limitations.
Sure, okay. I want to address some of this today. Like, some of what we see is pretty ridiculous. We need to set limits. I don't know whether 2 or 1's our answer. I'll observe that 2 cubic yards to me appears to be a ton. Like a dump truck, or it's a lot. Like, that's not really that much of a limit. 1 sounds like there might be many homes, you know, in these green areas that do produce more than 1. Like, if you have a, you know, an acre, like, that's a lot of grass. But I mean, they have the option, like you said, of kind of throttling it, what you call it, like where they just will dump out every so often. I don't know whether 2 or 1's the right answer, but I want to do something today. I want to get rid of some of the abuse that I see in the system and start encouraging people to have some better practices.
I'm totally with you, right? But I think we also need to talk about that enforcement, right? Like, just setting a limit and updating the ordinance is meaningless unless we actually start doing something about enforcement, and that's kind of what we're lacking today.
Sure. I think there's 2 things that I heard. Well, 1 is the cost. We'll leave them a tag. We won't pick it up. Like, well, I mean, that's the enforcement right there. It's like, you put up too much, you don't pay, it stays in front of your house and you get to know it.
Right, and that's fine, right?
But realize y'all are the enforcement. Just putting that out there, that's the enforcement. You know where we are, where we go on these things already. And so that's just what I want to be clear about.
And actually, from John is 2.
Yeah, you put the tag. You don't pick, either pay, you don't pick up. That's the, you know, so, and Heather and her team, John, if they handle that part, we can handle the staff. If there's an elevated, you know, action that comes after that. That's y'all, so that's all I'm saying is and look, John's already said, we do education first, we work that through, that's always been we do that now on lots of things. It would be, hey, yeah, we'll get it this time, understand the next time, so and I'll tell you, even with, right now with Holly Springs, what they're going through is the warning that the information that was provided to their board, spoke with the manager about is, just know, when you make a change in yard waste, you know, lots of things, yard waste, people get, I mean, they get pretty upset about the yard waste stuff, so they're going to call it on. You have to be prepared for that, and that's the piece of it. Yeah.
I just don't want to end up in a situation where, like, you know, the list is big and our ordinance says that, but we pick it up anyway, right? Because, you know, the resident down other place to go, right? Because that's what we're doing today.
You want the rule.
Well, I want the rule, but I also want to make sure that, okay, if we do implement this payment here, we're actually going to use it, right? And then, so we're going to be, and not just creating our paper tiger, right? We're actually going to put them through this.
So I'm good with going with the recommended stuff that was mentioned for 1 and 2 and going with the two cubic yards as instead of the X. Fill that in and do that right now. And information on the curb stuff, the container stuff, we still work toward that, a bit more information, but we go with the first few things today, like right now.
And I'm presuming that the 2 recommendation for 2 was based upon an assessment and kind of that sort of stuff. So I'm willing to trust the expertise and judgment that I'm getting there.
I think we need to do 2, and we can revisit this in a year. Say, hey, here's how many excess collections we had. It was more than we thought, it was less than we thought, it's having impact, not having impact.
Well, what we do with that, if you go that route, that would be wonderful, and here's why. We already do city work orders, we take pictures, we're gonna have real data to support it. And again, council's always got the option of throttling up, increasing, whatever. We'll work quickly on the convenience center, you know, getting all that process going.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, a pickup truck per household is generous. But you will still get complaints from people who have more than that. But you've also set, if you set the $50 rate, that's disposal costs and operations costs. That's not a profit for the town. That's just being available to come get it, for that. So
So I don't think that we need to shoot for March 2026 with anything at this point, okay? I'd like to see some of the cost analysis. I want to see some data because, right now we just have the grapple truck data, but presumably some of these files the chippers handle are well in excess of 2 yards too, right? And so there's some unknown volume out there that we haven't, captured in the data set that we're staring at. So I think starting with 1 and 2, take a year to get our data, run the financial models, whatever, so that we are better prepared to, to make the containerization decision, based on additional data.
And 10 feet from the drain and 6 feet from the mailboxes and stuff. Is that where we're landing on that too?
We'll make that note. So what I'm gonna make sure. So one, we seem to be headed toward containers. Before we get there, the phased approach toward containers. We want to place the limits on the cubic yard. I hear 2, is that what I heard? 2.
Yeah.
2 cubic yards is what we're, so we'll have to get these ordinances will come back to you for the official change.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get, so 2 cubic yard change, fee enforcement, and we're over that. Okay.
They part of the budget.
$50 per 2 again,
We can
right?
get that into this year's budget. Right.
Okay, stricter enforcement of all this
Yeah,
stuff.
so, fee enforcement, we get a year of data in which Heather and John and their team will collect that, what we're actually seeing. And then that's when we can evaluate, what the next step is, whether it's another step down or whether it's going to container at that point. In the meantime, what we would do is build out a potential transition plan program to, cost out what the plan looks like to go to container. So what does that startup cost look like? What does our life cycle costs look like that will compare then to now? That will calculate in all your depreciation, everything like that. We can do that.
So
And
are
then we'll
those,
have better from that. And then from there, you'll be able to say, use that data, use that scenario, including the cost of recovery piece. We'll tell you what those fees need to be. You can decide if it's full or partial. Then you can determine on when you want to set that in place.
In terms of the cost recovery, I definitely want to move. I think it's a big jump to go to 1% cost recovery. I think it's impossible to have that with the system. Like, it's doing the math in my head, like I said earlier, it'll be several thousand for some homes and like nothing for other homes. That's the big actual effort to do it. And that's really not feasible to do. So, but moving in that direction, I definitely would like to get to a system where it's more equitable somehow. And I think this access fee is the way to do it. And cost recovery is starting to trend towards 100% as opposed to towards 0%. Where we are now. And I wonder if, in terms of the startup cost containerization, kind of switching topics, like, to a certain extent, can we pass those fees through anyway? Like, have a year where the yard waste fee is $12 instead of $10 and recover some sort of cost that way? Or could there be a one-off fee when you, start yard waste service that you have to pay some amount, it'd be subsidized to some degree, but like maybe it's $20 to start up yard waste service to.
I want to, so I'm not sure if every household needs a can, right? Because like, especially the condo communities and whatnot, it's like, it's just a third garbage can that they're never going to use, right? So are there, for those higher density populations, alternatives that we want to implement? It's like, central collection areas or something. Because like putting a can at every townhome, I don't think is needed. And, people are kind of not want it because like they already have 2 containers that they put in their garage. Now they got 3.
I think we can answer that. You made a good point, but I think we can answer that tonight.
No, exactly. But I think there's more to consider here. So it's kind of my.
So I agree. So yes, let's think about more. I say we set a policy where we start walking towards modernization. Maybe we don't write down a date in ink. But I don't want to say March 26th is off the table. I think like that's something we could try to strive towards, but I don't want to commit to March 26th publicly or privately.
I kind of just working back with a 19 months timeline just to get equipment, right? It's like that means that we need to make a decision within the next 3 months in order to kind of hit that, right? And I don't think that 3 months is going to be enough to get us the data that we're looking for.
You do like some areas, big containers Or is it gonna be all one?
Well, recommendation has been to do it all at one time, just to
So did Hot Springs buy like
Yeah.
5?
did it all at one time and launch at the same time. Did a turnover. I did want to ask council about, as part of our, pre-collection, set out parameters and, yard waste collection fees, contractor waste, I think I heard, are y'all okay with?
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that, make sure.
Yeah, and so like you putting the kind of the onus on the people that's employee contractor to, hey, you gotta take this stuff, like don't jump in the street, right? Because I'm gonna get the bill when you're gone. So I think that's again, like in terms of behavior change, right?
That's a big win too.
It is, I mean, we're essentially subsidizing landscapes.
Right, exactly.
Like that.
Yeah.
And because there's the ones that do it right, and then, you know, okay, but then the fly by night ones, you know, that we're all subsidizing the behavior right now.
They may go away.
Got anything else from us?
I appreciate y'all's willingness to help us on those and, we'll get everything else that you asked for. And again, I greatly appreciate it.
Sean, anything else?
No, I'm good. I think I got.
Anything we need to do?
We'll start.
Brandon?
I was hungry though.